welcome to Rising. We've got a great show for you today to kick off Monday morning. It's another dreary day in the nation's capital, but here we are.
We'll survive. How's your scooter these days, Robby?
Scootered through some puddles, had a couple near fatal accidents.
Not the perfect mode of transport for these.
My car is in the shop. I finally decided to fix some issues that were totally self-inflicted with the car. You know, pulling in and out of these cramped parking structures in DC.
Not a good idea.
You put some dings on the old girl. But here we are. CBS News said it would not have its anchors fact-check during Tuesday night's vice presidential debate between J.D. Vance and Tim Walz. Now, the network said it will be up to the opponents to fact-check each other, not the moderators. Imagine that. This is, of course, in stark contrast with the last debate earlier in September, in which ABC moderators David Muir and Lindsay Davis corrected Trump's inaccurate statements 4 times, but they did not do the same thing for Kamala Harris, even though she also made some misstatements, stoking anger from Trump and his supporters, and I would say some objective media watchers, perhaps like myself.
CBS News' decision to forego correcting the candidates is earning criticism. Political scholar Norm Ornstein posted, quote, "I spent 30 years as an election analyst for CBS. It was the gold standard for television news. Those days and their standards are long gone." Activist and writer Charlotte Clymer posted, quote, "Let's be clear about something. The only reason that CBS News is declining to fact-check the vice presidential debate is that they're terrified of Trump and his supporters retaliating for being held accountable on the candidate's relentless lying and disinformation." Now, meanwhile, with 35 days left before the election, the race is obviously speeding up in its final stretch. Donald Trump lobbed attacks against Harris, questioning the 59-year-old's mental fitness again. Let's watch.
Joe Biden became mentally impaired. Kamala was born that way. Okay. She was born that way. And if you think about it, only a mentally disabled person could have allowed this to happen to our country. Anybody would know this.
Latest polling continues to show Trump and Harris neck and neck. But according to a scoop in Axios, Democratic Congresswoman from Michigan Elisa Slotkin said Harris is underwater there. According to 538's average of polls, Harris is up by about 2.4 points in Michigan. The latest New York Times Siena College poll has her up by just 1. The outlet further reports that according to a recording even, taken in a virtual fundraiser last week, Slotkin said, quote, "I'm not feeling my best right now about where we are on Kamala Harris in a place like Michigan. We have her underwater in our polling."
Well, let's start there and then circle back to the debate. So the problem, and I talked about this in my radar last week, is that yes, Kamala Harris is up a little bit in a lot of these states, in Michigan and Pennsylvania, but you know, I looked again at the polling going back to 2020 for Joe Biden in these states the week before the election took place. They had him up 5-6 points in Pennsylvania, 5 and 6 points. In the end, he won by 1.17 point. So even though he did win and he won these states, it was still a massive polling error in Democrats' favor.
Yeah.
If that holds, or even if it's a little less, but still an error of, let's say, 3 points, Donald Trump is going to win these states.
Yeah.
And so she's not up by enough. Again, if it's the same as now, if the polls are exactly dead on perfectly, they figured out all the kinks, and what they're telling you is real close to the final, then yeah, she is going to win. Yeah. But you can understand where the nervousness comes from, showing her in her must-win states just up a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that is not a partisan point. It concerns Democrats. It gives some reassurance to Republicans. And the issue, particularly in those so-called blue wall states, is not solely that the polls are wrong or have been in the past. It's that they've been wrong in a really specific way, which is they have tended to undercount Donald Trump's support very dramatically in both elections in which he has participated. You mentioned Pennsylvania. In Wisconsin, the first time around against Hillary Clinton, the polling averages had her vote share almost exactly right, but his undercounted by about 7 points. Right. anything of even vaguely that scale is going to see him be the next president. And just one final point, Robby, on the Michigan question. Of course, it is a state that a lot of people are watching closely anyway, because it has the highest concentration of Arab Americans of any state in the Union, about 200,000. And obviously, Gaza will be a pertinent issue there.
Yes, my home state, there might be a specific Michigan-centric reason why she could struggle there if there's lingering dissatisfaction. We know there is dissatisfaction with the Biden administration's policy toward Israel. Kamala has tried to reassure this aspect of the base. I don't know how well she's done at that, because she really hasn't signaled any policy differences whatsoever from Biden. You had the mayor of Hamtramck, which is this very, very heavy Arab American population in suburbs of Detroit, near where I grew up. The mayor endorsed Donald Trump, just purely as a self-evident FU to Kamala Harris. So
and Jill Stein is on the ballot in Michigan, as she is in so many other states, if people are really looking for a protest vote on the Gaza question, I think. Circling back to something we also mentioned in the introduction, what did you think about Trump blasting her purported mental capacities?
Yeah, I mean, that's not a... It's not a kind thing to say.
It's not remotely accurate.
I would not. Yes, I would not describe one's differences with Kamala Harris, and I have many, in that I don't think she's mentally unfit. I think she is not the clearest communicator ever. I don't think it has to do with
which one could also say of Trump.
One could also say of Trump. But I will say that I agree with the CBS News decision not to do heavy-handed, real-time fact-checking in the debate. We've now had 2 debates, and I think it's clear which one was handled better. The CNN debate, where they didn't... At most, Jake Tapper, I think, repeated a question once or twice when he didn't feel like the answer from, I think it was from Donald Trump, was at all geared toward that question. He said, here was my question, would you like to answer it? And then he left it to them to fact check each other. The problem with the ABC model is that, it was just too one-sided. I know, I'm sure you will say that the volume of misstatements from Trump is greater than the misstatements from Kamala Harris. But you can't say that Kamala Harris did not say anything that couldn't have been fact-checked by the moderators. She said, for instance, and this is not the biggest, most partisan scoring point ever, but she said that there were no U.S. soldiers involved in combat zones or in harm's way. That is simply not true. In fact, we had U.S. soldiers killed as a result of what's going on. So they could have interjected and said, but that's not true, and they didn't. And that's, if they're going to just do it on a one-sided way, they should remove themselves from that process.
So I disagree with you, but not maybe quite as much as you would expect. I do think that it is part of the function of journalism to try to hold people to account, to try to avoid them making obvious misstatements or stating obvious untruths. The problem about fact-checking in debates, which I think should be done, and I'm not a fan of the CBS decision, but the difficulty is people are human. They are moderating a very high-pressure moment. And oftentimes the things that they are prepared to fact-check are things that a candidate has said before that are untrue or false or misleading, which in my mind is fair enough. The problem with the Kamala Harris thing about the combat zones, they should have fact-checked that. I think I'm, fairly well up on things, and I wouldn't have known for sure that was untrue in the moment she said it, which then means as a moderator you would be in the situation of having to risk a fact check that is later proven wrong, and I think that can get dicey. I also think, to be fair to you, sometimes the fact checking process itself can be ideologically tainted to try to minimize certain stories and maximize others.
Right, because when they get into it over Trump about whether whether crime is going up or down, that is a somewhat complicated
right.
issue. Is it down? Yes, it has gone down in recent. We're better off than when we were in the pandemic. The trajectory over like the course of human history is for crime to be down, but it also did go up for a while, and it's up still in some cities, not in others. And are we talking about murders? Are we talking about what are we talking about? It's a complicated thing. So just for them to intervene, and also I hear you on them not being confident maybe to fact check that, but they got to have people talking in their ear as we have our producers talking in our ear during this conversation.
Sure.
We have our computers in front of us. Right. We have our cell phones. I mean, it's a difficult thing to do, to pay attention to what the person is saying and 3 different conversations you're having behind the scenes.
Right.
So I get it. I mean, we live a little bit of that life.
Sure.
But there could be people feeding you for directing the television production. I mean, there are people doing that, and I'm sure they're saying, "Ooh, challenge Trump." Yeah. They could say, "Challenge Kamala. Here's where." And I think. And again, if it's an interview, I agree with you. Of course, the purpose of journalism is to challenge powerful people. If it's just one-on-one between the candidate and the journalist, of course they're going to do that. I would expect that. I've wished that they would do that to Kamala Harris a little bit more firmly. But in the context of the debate, where it's really their job to do that, I think it is primarily the moderator's job to facilitate the candidates being able to do the fact-checking of each other. Maybe with some light, so if some obvious statistical falsehood gets presented, well then yes, do I have a problem with the moderator saying, well, actually, the FBI has said, according to data from this year, that whatever, the crime is down, and then you have more of a discussion about it.
I think that's fair. I worry that the CBS decision isn't driven by these principles that we were talking about in our high-minded way, but is actually driven by concern about pushback from partisans on either side. I worry that it's not this principled idea that it is up to Kamala Harris to fact-check Donald Trump and vice versa. It's actually, we don't want the trouble of people online and elsewhere taking us to task because they have complaints about our fact-checking.
Well, we've got a lot more topics to get into on Rising right after this. Stay tuned.